surfaces when you are on the app. And so you'll notice that for a lot of platforms, and starting with Facebook, which we're discussing now, they've moved from a chronological feed to an algorithmic feed. And what does that mean? That basically means that previously, 10 or so years ago, many of these platforms just used to surface content in terms of what's newest. So you'd see the recent posts first, and then as you scroll down, you'll be seeing older and older posts. So just purely based on the time that those posts were created. But now, these platforms rely on algorithms, which are basically just a set of instructions and rules that decide when posts show up. So it's not necessarily chronological. There are all these different signals that the platforms take into account so that they can rank posts and decide, hey, this post should be seen first, or this post deserves more eyeballs over that post. And it can seem very opaque. But basically, Meta has tried to explain this because obviously, there are people who might be very suspicious and say, why does this platform choose, to surface some kind of content over others? And according to Meta, the key factors that affect the ranking on the Facebook feed are how often somebody interacts with posts from friends, groups, or pages. So, Meta says that friends and family are prioritized. Another thing that it considers is if the type of post is something you often interact with. So, for example, if you regularly click on photos or videos, then the platform will show you more posts with photos and videos because it's learned that from your behavior, you interact and engage with that content more often. And another factor is the number of comments, likes, reactions, and shares that a post receives from the people and pages that see it. So again, if a post is garnering a lot of engagement, that kind of creates this virtuous or vicious cycle, depending on the kind of content, where more and more people see it because more and more people are engaging with it. So basically, the more people like and comment on content, the more likely their friends and family will see it, which is, like I mentioned, a virtuous or vicious cycle. So here is a very simply animated example of, again, something that you're all very familiar with, which is the Facebook feed. And this is an example of the feed ranking. So basically the different types of content that show up on the feed. So how can you effectively get on the Facebook feed? Well, here are a few tips that you can use. And basically, like I mentioned earlier, your content needs to be able to elicit a reaction. So it needs to be able to get comments, likes, or shares. And as I mentioned again in my introduction, bad actors have weaponized this to go viral by using emotive language. But there's an ethical way to do it. So, for example, you can start a discussion using prompts like, hey, what do you think about this? To get people to give their opinion, because, like we said, the more comments that a piece of content gets, the more likely the platform is to surface it. You can give people a clear call to action. So, for example, you can tell people to share it or spread the word so that they can just get that content moving through the ecosystem. And then you can also focus on the audience in your messaging by using phrases like, here's what this means for you. So, for example, for those of you who are storytellers, you center the audience in your narrative. So that then, helps things become less abstract and helps your audience say, hey, this is something that applies to me and, probably I should engage with it. And so, we'll move on to Instagram, which of course is owned by Meta. It's a sister platform of Facebook. And a key part of the Instagram experience is the explore page. So, platforms like TikTok have shown how powerful an algorithmically curated endless feed of content can be. And Instagram has refined its explore page, allowing users to see even more content from accounts they don't follow but might be interested in. And so I'll be showing you, how and why content appears on the explore page. And that's a very important distinction, that Instagram will surface content from accounts that you don't necessarily follow, but these are accounts that the platform feels you might be interested in. So how does Instagram Explore work? So it basically surfaces the content on the explore page based on how much similar content you've watched or expanded. So if you've watched a certain type of video, say for example, a cat playing with a laser pointer, it's just going to show you more and more, of that kind of video. It will also surface content based on how many of your friends have liked that content or follow that account. So for example, if you have very many mutual accounts that follow a specific account, it's likely to surface that account's content because it feels that it's something you may be interested in based on your friend group. And it also surfaces content based on how much similar content you've liked or added to your story. So this is content that you may have interacted with in the past in a different way. It will send a signal to the platform that this is content that you like, and it's more likely to share that content with you. So again, here is something that most of us will be familiar with, where you see something on Explore, you open it, and it brings up that piece of content, but not just that piece of content, but as you scroll down, it shows more and more of that specific kind of content within that scrolling experience. So it's almost a bottomless well of content, an endless scroll. So generally, organic content discovery on Instagram is more forgiving than on platforms like Twitter. And you can reach users interested in your content by, for example, benchmarking against industry leaders in your field. So if you're a journalist, it's a very good idea to look at what your peers are doing on these platforms and try and replicate that if it's successful. It's also important to maintain a consistent visual language with emphasis on imagery and simple, easy to read text. And if you're already producing content on other platforms, it might be a good idea to repurpose that content. So for example, podcasts or video in an Instagram ready format. So that would be for Instagram specifically 60 seconds on a 1:1 aspect ratio if it's for the feed, or a 9:16 aspect ratio if it's for vertical. So if it's for stories. And another thing that you can do is use highly targeted and specific hashtags in your copy. And the basic rule here is less is more. So here are some examples. Unfortunately, these are examples from Kenya. I forgot to mention in my introduction, I am based in Kenya. And so these are examples of some news publishers from here who use Instagram very effectively. Of course, you can look for similar accounts in Nigeria or wherever you're watching, and just find the most successful publishers on Instagram and what works for them. So here you see some of the elements that I mentioned. They have a very clear and distinctive style. They have a very uncluttered image with like a big piece of key art, the logo in the top left corner, as well as a short description at the bottom. And then obviously on the right-hand side, you have the whole feed, the whole story in text, or at least a large part of the story, so that people can expand it and read more. And then this is an example of what their Instagram feed looks like. So again, those key elements that I mentioned before, a very distinct visual style, a very consistent art style. So they're using the same brand colors throughout, they're using the same layout. So it gives sort of a very predictable and noticeable presence online. So from there, we'll be moving to WhatsApp, which is, I believe, Africa's biggest social media network, if you consider WhatsApp a social media network, and it's bigger than Facebook itself. So more people in Africa use WhatsApp than use Facebook or Instagram or Twitter and so on. But the thing about WhatsApp is that WhatsApp is a dark social platform. So unlike Facebook and Instagram, where public accounts, pages, and posts can be seen by everyone, networks like WhatsApp are quote unquote closed, which means that only the people in a WhatsApp conversation, group, or broadcast list can see content in those channels. And so what does this mean for you? It means that it's harder to measure the spread or virality of content on WhatsApp, especially when that content appears in groups or lists that you aren't in. So this is something that, unlike on Facebook or Instagram, where if an account is public, you can see its posts, you can see how many people have liked or engaged with that post. On WhatsApp, despite it connecting people in very similar ways, that those kind of metrics aren't publicly visible. So that makes it a little bit more challenging to see how well your content is performing. But these are some of the things you can do if you'd like to explore publishing your content on WhatsApp, and you can track it as well. And the key thing here is to create the appropriate channel on WhatsApp. So WhatsApp has a variety of tools for publishers and small businesses that I'm sure you're all familiar with. You can create a WhatsApp group or a WhatsApp broadcast, depending on your needs. A WhatsApp group obviously is smaller and more intimate. But the thing with a WhatsApp group is that everybody can engage with each other. But if you're publishing, for example, a newsletter, that might not be the most ideal scenario for you. So you might opt instead for a WhatsApp broadcast where you can list 200 or so contacts, but they don't actually know who each other are. They just receive content from you, but they don't really interact with each other. So you might need to decide what works best for you. Another important thing is to build an audience by creating a marketing funnel to drive users to your preferred channel. And I'll expound about, marketing funnels later during this session. You can also use tracking links to measure how many people click through to your content. So those of you who are familiar with publishing online might have seen these tools called URL or link shorteners. And one very famous example is Bitly, bit.ly. And so you can use that service to create these custom shortened links that then tell you how many people have clicked on them. So when you're publishing on WhatsApp, you may not know how many people have actually seen your message, but you will know through this service how many people clicked on your link. So that's one way you can track your content on a closed platform like WhatsApp. And another important thing is to respect the format or the platform by using very short data light content. So I used to work with someone who used to say that megabytes are basically the new money. And so for us, especially as Africans, it's very important for us to be very aware of how much data we're using. Because we don't have, for example, or many of us aren't on unlimited plans or postpaid plans and so on. So we kind of pay as we go. And so for us, using data is very, very top of mind. So when you're publishing on WhatsApp, you don't want to send enormous videos for people to have to download and watch. You need to kind of focus on the biggest group possible, which is people who may not have the kind of data that will allow them to consume such heavy content. So you kind of need to keep that in mind. And if you're not ready to publish content natively on WhatsApp itself, you can still generate impact and virality on WhatsApp by having a share on WhatsApp button on all the stories on your website. So if you have a news website, for example, but you're not actually publishing anything on WhatsApp, one way for you to get that content off your website onto WhatsApp is just having a WhatsApp button, a share on WhatsApp button embedded on every story that you publish, so that people can share it when they're scrolling to your website. They can share it to WhatsApp themselves. And so here is an example of what publishing on WhatsApp looks like. So, there's, broadcast lists on the box to the left. So that shows you how you can segment your audience based on location. And then on the right is a newsletter published by PesaCheck on WhatsApp. And again, you can see all the elements I've mentioned. So you have like the custom trackable link at the end of every story that allows us to kind of track how many people have clicked on the newsletter. And again, it's very, it doesn't have any media, it's very data light, and it respects people's data usage. So now we're going to look at what successful messaging looks like on these platforms. And again, going back to the question I asked at the very beginning, what contributes to the virality of content online? And, I believe there are journalists who are in this room, so they may know this themselves, but I'll just take us through it anyway. The hook is basically similarly to a lead in journalism, where effective social media content needs a compelling first line. So, how can you write a great hook? One of the things you can do is you can take advantage of the curiosity gap. So the curiosity gap is basically a bit of information that the reader does not have when they read your content, but they would like to know more. So that's what's generally called the curiosity gap. So you need to take advantage of that by kind of leaving out certain bits of information, so that somebody is compelled to click on your content and learn more. You can also ask a question, just to get people to find out the answer in your content. You can tell a story, and I'll show examples of this in the next few slides. How you can transform just a bland social media post by focusing on the story of the content itself, as well as setting expectations. So what will the person get when they give you their time in return for clicking on your link? So here's an example of something from Al Jazeera. Who are extremely good at social media, as I'm sure we're all aware. And here's, how you look at how compelling the post is, where they begin with a quote and then they kind of tell a story literally within 2 lines. So, that's a really great example of how you can do that yourself. Another example from Al Jazeera, where they're asking a question, which countries are sending military assistance to Ukraine? And then the answer is there. So, the question kind of makes you think, this seems interesting. I wonder what it is. And then the answer is there's both a link as well as a visualization for you to see. Another important thing is the tone. So, for example, you need to kind of figure out what tone works for the platform that you're publishing on. So young people, for example, are more likely to be on Instagram than on Facebook. So you might not want to use the same tone across all the platforms that you use. So you can kind of refine your tone by defining your brand voice. So this depends on the organization that you're working on. So, is your organization a legacy media company with a very formal brand voice, or is it a youth-focused digital-first startup? And basically based on that, you can kind of figure out how you want to present your content to people. It's also important to define your audience. So you can use analytics tools on Facebook and Instagram to find out, for example, how old your audience is, where they are geographically, so that you can better tailor your tone. And then just test out different tones and find out what works. So just find out, what kind of tone brought about more engagement, what tone didn't quite work, and then just consistently over time use what works best. Is an example of tone. BuzzFeed obviously is a very youth-focused brand, even though it's been a while. It's been around for a few years now. And here's an example of a post with kind of a playful tone, and that's very critical to the success of their brand. Another example here from The Verge, where it's slightly more formal, but they still have like a little bit of a sense of humor. So, these are just examples of how different publishers kind of try and figure out what their brand voice is, what their brand stands for, and then kind of translate that to their social media. And then there's also the call to action. So the call to action basically is a fancy marketing term that it basically means, what do you want people to do? You've given people information. What do you want them to do next? And so every message you publish should direct your audience to do something. This needs to be clearly worded and as simple and as active as possible. And so how do you arrive at a call to action? You basically need to figure out what your communication objectives are so that you can create a call to action that makes sense for those objectives. So for example, if you want people to consume content, your call to action might be, click to read more, or tap the link in our bio, or, tune in at 9 p.m. And that tells people to actually take an action, after they've seen the content you've published. if you want people to subscribe to our product, you can tell them to, for example, sign up for our newsletter. So that tells people, I can take an action, I can sign up to get more of this content on another place. If you want people to, for example, attend an event like the one you're in, you can tell people to, get your tickets here, or, reserve your place or book your seat, and that's an example of a call to action that works for that objective. And if, for example, you're working for an organization that gets revenue from donations, your call to action could be, help us keep telling stories like this by donating below, or, give a gift to keep our publishing going, or something like that. So the call to action is very important because it actually tells your audience what to do next. And it also should align with your strategic objectives as an organization. So here is an example of a call to action. This is Full Fact, which is a fact-checking organization based in the UK. And you'll see there it's a long post, a bit of a long post, but the final line is, we've put together a beginner's guide to how you can do that with like a downwards pointing emoji. That tells a person, hey, there's a link here with a resource for you. Click on it, to get access to this resource. So that's an example of a call to action that you can use. So we've been going for around half an hour. I believe I have 15 minutes left. And with that 15 minutes, I'm just going to give you a crash course on marketing, because something that we need to understand is, as much as virality can be kind of reverse engineered organically, and I've kind of given you some very simple pointers on how to do that. Basically, these platforms rely on advertising revenue for their business. That's how they pay the bills. And because of this, the platforms disincentivize organic content or organic virality. So they make it increasingly difficult for you to reach an audience without paying them. And so, a key kind of arrow in your quiver that you should have is just a knowledge of marketing or paid promotion, so that you can kind of boost your content, if you have a budget to do so. And so I'm going to take you through some just basic fundamentals to help you do that. So if you want to advertise on Meta's platforms, that is Facebook and Instagram, there are a few tools baked into the platform that you can use. So for example, you can use custom audiences to target people based on location, interests, language, gender identity, and age. And you can also use lookalike audiences, what we call lookalike audiences, to target people who are interested in similar content. So the first one is basically, when you create an account on Facebook or on Instagram, it asks you for some basic information, sorry. It asks you, for example, your age, and then it also may ask you for your gender identity. So are you male, female, non-binary, genderqueer, and so on. And the rest of this information is basically drawn from the device you use. So for example, if you're an Apple device user, you may have seen there's a pop-up that says, would you like to allow this application to track your personal information? Yes or no? And so basically, if you say yes, that allows these platforms to kind of figure out where you are, what your interests are. They can track you, on the app itself, but also across other applications. And so they kind of draw in this information that they then serve to advertisers and say, hey, these are the things you can use to target audiences more precisely. And the second point, lookalike audiences are, this is basically a way of saying, if you have, for example, a competitor or a peer, and you see that, they have an audience that you would like to reach as well, you can just tell these platforms to create a lookalike audience that kind of mirrors the audience that your competitor or your peer is using. And then you can then advertise to that audience, just to kind of reach the same people that your peers are reaching. So these are options that are available to you when you're advertising. And so, here's a very simple look at what an advertising account on Facebook or Meta looks like, you'll see that there's on the left-hand tab, there's kind of like campaigns and objectives, because again, everything that you do needs to be tied to a specific objective. And then there's audiences and placements and budgets and so on. So, I'd advise you, if you're interested in exploring, advertising more, just try and set up a business account on Facebook, and then just try and play around and see, what you can do there. There's a ton of things that you can do very successfully. And so you might have remembered, if you're if you're paying attention and if I haven't bored you, that I did mention something called a marketing funnel way earlier, about 20 or so minutes ago. And so this is what a marketing funnel is. So as you all know, a funnel is basically, some sort of tool that you use to kind of get a liquid or whatever it is into a smaller place. And so you can see, a funnel, as you understand, is wider at the top and narrower at the bottom. And so a marketing funnel is basically a way to visualize the journey that your audience goes through, from the very top, where there's a wider audience and more people, to the very bottom, where there are fewer people, but these are more committed members of your audience. And so what paid targeting allows you to do is to create a funnel that builds an audience for you on a certain platform. And then over time, what you need to do is move from the top of the funnel, which is awareness, so just people who just know about your brand or your publication, and try and move them to a lower level of the funnel. So these are people who are regular readers, these are people who are newsletter subscribers, or who are paying subscribers. And so you want to move them from awareness to interest to desire to action. And as they go lower down the funnel, you're going to lose people along the way, which is why it narrows towards the bottom. But the lower people are in that marketing funnel, the more valuable they are to you as a business and as a brand. So these are people who are more likely to pay you for the content you produce. They're more likely to visit your website every day. They're more likely to interact with your content on social. They're more likely to advocate for your brand among their friends. And so, the funnel is very, very important, just in terms of just visualizing how to get people from interested to committed. And another thing that you can do with paid targeting is what's known as A/B testing. So there on the screen is a visualization of A/B testing, where you have two bits of content and you test them against each other, and then you find out what the winner is. So in this case, the winner is B. The winner got 72% as a score, and then the one on the left got 48%. So that's why it's the winner. And so basically, what this means is, with A/B testing, you can test the effectiveness of, for example, your copy, your imagery, and your audiences. And you do that by running similar bits of content with one variable. So one thing that's different between the two pieces of content. You run them at the same time, and then you find out what was more effective. So what kind of insights can you get from A/B testing? You can find out who is more likely to click on links or react or comment. So is it men or women? Is it millennials? Is it Gen Z? Is it urbanites? And you can run experiments to find out who is more likely to engage with your content. You can also run tests to find out where your content performs the best and what is the optimal budget for your content. So at what point does spending more stop delivering meaningful results? So, I'd advise you to look up A/B testing and just figure out, how you can implement that in your strategy as well. And so, as I mentioned at the outset, there's the ABCs of marketing, which is audiences, budgeting, and consistency. And so for audiences, like I mentioned, you can use analytics from Facebook and Instagram to know where your current audience is. And you can increase this knowledge further by running surveys to ask a selection of your audience what they feel about your content. You can acquire new audiences through targeted advertising based on personas you've developed to represent a selection of your current and potential audiences. And you can re-engage your current audience via data points they've already given you consent to use, such as email addresses. So once you start building an audience online, you can kind of use that audience audience to fulfill a number of your needs. Surveys are important if you want to find out how people actually feel about the content that you're doing. There's something called NPS, Net Promoter Score, which is a kind of survey that's standardized and used all over the world that basically tells you, how satisfied people are with your product. So for example, you might have seen these surveys that tell you from a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend X to friends and family? That's what's called an NPS survey. So you can use one of those just to find out how satisfied your customers or your audience is. And then the last point, re-engaging your audience, is very important. So for example, if you collect email addresses, and if these people have given you consent to use those email addresses, you can kind of put those email addresses into Facebook and then target ads to people who have those addresses listed. So for example, if you've collected email addresses based on an email newsletter that you send out, or an event that you hosted and people registered using their email addresses, you can then use that data. So long as you have consent from those users, you can use that data to kind of re-engage your audience on other platforms as well. So budgeting here can refer to two things. You can allocate time if you're using purely organic promotion, or money if you're using paid promotion. And this is based on the outcome that you've set. So there are various things that you can budget for if you are running paid promotions. You can budget for clicks, video views, podcast listens, newsletter subscribers, and donations. These are just a handful of the things that you can use your budget for. And having a clear outcome in mind. Sorry, I saw the room was in darkness, so I was a bit concerned, but I'll just continue. Having a clear outcome in mind allows you to figure out how much each action, such as a click, or acquisition, such as subscriber, costs. So for example, if it costs you 50 cents to acquire one subscriber, you can allocate resources more evenly to meet your subscriber growth targets, or reassess whether the cost is worth paying for, especially since acquisition costs rise over time. So this is a way that you can attribute a certain figure of money to each action that you're trying to get. And so, again, if you have a budget for paid advertising, it's very important to kind of keep track of all these metrics. And finally, consistency is very important. So while iteration is important, each platform may require a specific voice or tone, which we've already kind of discussed during this presentation. And having a consistent style of presenting information, such as graphics, videos, or illustrations, earns you trust and makes your content easier to identify when it's reshared, even without content. So this is a way for you, once you've settled on a brand voice, once you've settled on a brand style or an illustrative style or an art style, just use that consistently over time, because it means that people trust you more. They know that your content looks a specific way, so that even when that content is shared without context, so if somebody, for example, takes a screenshot of your image or your video, your infographic, without saying what account it came for, because you've been so consistent over time with how you visually present this information to your users, even when it's shared without content, it can still be attributed to you. So people can say, hey, that looks familiar. I think it's publisher X, because basically you've used the same kind of design elements over time. And so, yeah, that's basically the end of my session. We've done it in just over 40 minutes. So I believe we have around 4 minutes left of this session. And so basically, I am available for any questions or comments that you may have. I'm not quite sure how they're going to get to me, but I'm sure somebody will figure that out. And if there's nothing further, I'm happy to give the time back.
Okay, any specific questions? Because I think this is an important topic. We felt it's an important topic because one of the key things we know about journalism is how do you get as many eyes as possible to your stories, right? And that you can only do through viral storytelling. So, like, how do you create content that many people are actually resonating with? How many people actually have an idea of what you're talking to? Apart from the story itself being very powerful, how you tell it also really matters. Yeah. Are there any questions? Any questions? Looks like there's no question today.
I know it's much more easier to probably run okay, so I was saying that I know it's much easier to run or to get engagement via WhatsApp, for example, if you are an organization. So I am wondering how an individual, all right, say an independent journalist, for example, can run this successfully without having to often share your content on closed groups. For example, in closed groups, rather, for example, I have several groups I belong to. I wouldn't want to share something there except that group is for this purpose. So I like to respect whatever it is, whatever reason it is, the group was created. So I was trying to figure out what you were saying with respect to utilizing WhatsApp for this purpose.
In groups where it may not be relevant. For example, if you have a group for your apartment, you don't want to share irrelevant content for your neighbors to see. Let me just look for a specific slide. 1 second. Publishing on WhatsApp. So you might recognize this slide. I hope my presentation is still visible on the screen. But basically, there's a way that you can build out broadcast lists for people you want to reach. So, for example, if you're a media organization, you can ask people, first of all, you can create a WhatsApp account for your media organization. So you're not sharing this content as an individual, you're sharing this content on WhatsApp as an organization. And then what you do next is you build out broadcast lists. So these are lists of recipients. They can be up to 250 people per list. And what this does is that instead of it being a WhatsApp group where, like I mentioned, everybody can respond to each other, there can be somewhat chaotic at times. These are lists where people just receive content directly from you. So they can't interact with each other, even if they're members of the same list. And then with these lists, you can also segment your audience so that you can give them more relevant content. So for example, you see here, we have a list for Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia. We have lists for Uganda, South Africa, and so on at PesaCheck. And so you can send content to these people that's relevant to them. So you're not just sending the same content to everyone. You can send content that's hyper-specific to the list that you want to target. So I would encourage you to just explore using broadcast lists on WhatsApp as a way for you to publish content directly to your readers through the platform.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like what you explained now applies to one if you're running like a applies to one who owns probably a media house or you're working as a group. I'm talking of doing this as an individual. You get what I mean? For example, you said you open, you get a WhatsApp account that is dedicated to this purpose, right? Now you are an individual, say an independent journalist, and you don't have a dedicated WhatsApp number or WhatsApp account for this purpose. Do you have suggestions how you can do this as an individual and not as a group? I have a media, I'm attached to a media outlet. We run WhatsApp, we use WhatsApp for all of this as a group. But as an individual, I also work as an individual, as an independent journalist. So that's what I'm trying to get. For example, if I don't belong to that group, I might not have access to these channels you're talking about. I don't know if you get me.
Yes, so I believe what you're saying is, if you're trying to distribute content from an individual level rather than from an organization's account.
That's what I'm saying.
And there, I would just recommend, the only thing that you can do basically is try and find relevant WhatsApp groups that you can use. So these could be groups for professional bodies, or groups around certain subjects or interests. But again, the focus of my presentation was for publishing from an organization standpoint. So I may not be able to give you a satisfactory answer there because it wasn't the point of this presentation.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much and have a great rest of the day.
All right, thank you so much. I see our next speaker has joined. And thank you so much, Mark, for the presentation. I think that was very, very insightful. I think we might need to also think about, on an individual level, how can you actually get the word out there? So I think that's a point noted, and we'll be able to probably build that into some of our other communications going forward. So I think to proceed from here, I think our technical team will need probably a minute to just switch the feed. So, and then we can start with the next session. All right.